because they don't finish the impacts of their arguments. They rely on their audience to think. I compare this to good user experience design. Have you ever been on a website where you go through most of the checkout process and they start asking you for random information? You're like, why are they asking me for this? And you abandon the checkout? Have you ever done that before? Probably don't have enough credit cards. I do that all the time. Or, okay, how about this? Have you ever used something that says, like, there are different cancel buttons, and one says, okay, and then one says confirm, and then one says save, and you're like, what's the difference between those? And you're panicking because it didn't just say save all 3 times, and so you're starting to think, maybe there's something going on. That's what debaters do to judges. Is debaters use similar words and similar concepts, but then require their audience to do some level of thinking, and they use ballots that way. So what we're going to work on is, I like to call it kill shot attack to the judge, but it follows the last part is 4-point refutation. So pop quiz, 4 points of 4-point refutation. We're assuming you already have this basic foundation and not teaching it to you. 4-point refutation. Go.
They said, I say, here's why.
Good. Identify is point 1. What they said. 2, claim. This is what you said. I said. Should this be long or short?
Short.
Bumper stickers. 3, prove. Your use of warrants. And then 4, impact. What I want to dive into is impacting. But first of all, would anyone like a deeper explanation of this stuff? Do you need that?
Yeah.
Okay. No problem at all. So, this is all under the concept of refutation. And let me tell you a way that debaters do it really poorly, and then you're going to immediately recognize, oops, I do that sometimes. There are 2 ways that it happens. In policy debate, it happens like this. Here comes first negative speaker. You can't refute if you're the first affirmative speaker, because nobody else has said anything yet. You still follow this part, but you can't really identify what this is. Okay, so here comes first negative speaker. Let's assume that the 1AC had, I don't know, 2 harms, which that you even use the word harms is obnoxious, but I'll do that for later. So they have 2 harms. Here comes negative speaker. I have 5 significance points. That's what they said. You have no idea what that does to a judge. Because on a judge's flow, they flowed this whole case, and here was harm 1, and here was harm 2, and you just said you have 5 significance points. Which of the 5 significance points responds to which of the harms? How did I know that significance means harms? You just changed the terminology on me. Which brings up a funny counterpoint. One of my favorite ways to test people in debate is by using synonyms. Because if they expect me to debate in a box, I'm going to get right outside of the box because my audience doesn't know the box. So if my audience doesn't know the box, and I stay out of the box, if they only know the box, they won't know what to do. So, for example, if I call these problems instead of harms, I guarantee you, if you do that in your case, which would make way more sense to everybody out there, does harm sound weird?
Yes.
The first time you heard it, it sounded weird. I've debated people who call them ills. Ill 1, ill 2, ill 3. That sounds weird. Everybody gives business presentations and says there are problems. But I guarantee you, if you run a case that has 2 problems, somebody's going to come and cross-examine you and they're going to say, were those problems harms? Which is another way of saying they don't know what a harm is, really. Do you see what I mean? And then what negative said was significance. So what actually happens if a good debate judge is flowing is they go to white space and they say, okay, there are just 5 points elsewhere. 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm mildly stressed by that, and then I expectantly wait for you to apply these 5 points to the harms specifically. Doesn't happen. Round goes on. That is failure to impact. because you're requiring the judge's mind to do the following work. These 5 significance points in totality outweigh the significance of harms 1 and 2. That's a pretty complex statement to demand that a judge be thinking in their mind. And we have to be much tighter than that in our responses. Okay, so that's how it happens in policy. Here's how it happens in value debate. How many of you here are value debaters? Okay, all right. So I'm going a little deeper. So let's do a five-speech round. Here's how it works. And judges, this is why you're confused by LD, by the way. 5 speeches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Value. Even though I don't know what the value is for, I know I have it. I call it mine because I invented justice. Contention 1, contention 2, contention 3, even though they're actually interrelated, and if you pull one out, the syllogism falls. So they are not contentions because Andy presented them as contentions in such a way that the judge didn't get that, oh, you're contending something. This is your thesis. You presented them as objects because you learned it by copying somebody's case that you probably should use that word somewhere. Okay, so value, criteria, contention 1, contention 2, contention 3. Is that a fair summation of the value case? That's fair. Here comes neg. Counter value, counter criteria, contention 1, contention 2. That's fair, right? And then maybe they'll spend some time talking about the other person's case. Why is that 1 and 2 for one thing? What would it more logically be?
4 and 5?
4 and 5. It would be more logical if you're going to expand the number of things being contended in the round to add to them instead of having to say my contention 1 and their contention 1 the rest of the round, which requires your judge to think. Especially when you depersonalize it and you say it in third person. I, the negative team's second contention versus the affirmative's second contention. That requires 3 thoughts from the judge. It's too much. On we go, though. It gets worse. This one's called terrorism. And this one's called terrorism. Even though they have the same stinking name. The debater's not going to do the work to say, oh, I listened. That point is the same as my point, so I should probably do what? What should I do instead? Rename it? Nope.
Instead of calling it a contention, you instead use it as a reply to the first.
Boom! You move your work up here. The judge shouldn't have to think through terrorism twice. In fact, if you're not going to do the work about weighing this terrorism point versus that terrorism point, the judge is left with a minute, which is, by the way, what they're also left with at the end of the value and counter-value debate. Because at the end, both debaters most of the time say, yeah, they're roughly the same, human rights and justice. And all the philosophers. Okay, on we go. I skipped the 1 AR, it doesn't matter, and we're going to voting issues. 1, 2, 3 from Ned. Am I still being fair? App has some too. 1, 2, 3. Here's the problem. Even though this one was named terrorism, the way it actually spits out in a voting issue is going to be something like safety or lives. Which isn't wrong if you're just giving a one standalone speech, but in a debate, very wrong. Because now you're requiring the judge to think, oh yeah, this word represents that concept even though they changed the name. Ah! That's a lot to ask. And now the clincher. If you, as app, win this 1 point, the value, and lose all other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 points, do you win or lose the debate round?
Depends on your judge.
Boom. What does the judge have to figure out? On my random whiteboard drawing, I introduced to you the importance scale. Most debaters stick to arguing about truth. Does this happen or doesn't it happen? Is this so or is it not so? But where we need to also spend our time, this is wisdom, is arguing about importance. My all-time favorite response, TBU, true but useless. My opponent is not wrong, it just doesn't apply in this round. The use of values is used to exclude and include different arguments. So it's about access. So the use of values, weighting mechanisms, define importance. So now, back to, does the judge know that? That this is the function of a value as a weighing mechanism? And you probably never mentioned that the value serves simply as a test of the resolution. So, does the judge vote for you or against you? And I think you already know the answer. You said it. You don't know. And then let's go through a permutation. Affirmative team wins voting issue 1, loses all 14 other issues in the debate round. Do they win or do they lose? We don't know. How many combinations and permutations are there? How do you run the math on this? There are 15 total issues. 15 times 14 times 30, 1.3 trillion. Judges, if you've ever been confused by a value debate round, it's not your fault. There are 1.3 trillion possible combinations in a standard value debate round that the debaters have not laid out for you. So your seemingly random decision is 100% correct. I'm bleeding all of our objectives together. I apologize. Start extracting. What do judges say as they're judging philosophy? You shouldn't ask that question, but I assume you do. What is your judging philosophy? What do they usually say to you? Let's all say one word together, okay? 3, 2, 1. Be clear. Am I wrong?
I usually hear clash, actually.
I hear clash 20% of the time. I hear be clear 80% of the time, and sometimes I hear polite, but usually that comes along with the other two. Have most of you heard be clear before? Most of the time. What do they mean by that? Why would every judge say it all the time?
It'll give you 1.3 trillion or million possibilities.
They just don't know how to articulate it that way. Because they don't, and they shouldn't, understand the full complexities of the debate theory. Your judges are begging you to be clear. You're not. That's why they keep saying it all the time. The clash point to me is the same. The negative case we just drew up has no clash. Woo! Go to two debaters. Ship's passing that. Back to here. So how do we be clear? Well, first of all, we should identify what our opponent said before we refute it directly. They said this, and in Aristotelian rhetoric, we would say charitably. You maybe even build up their argument better than it was, and acknowledge the doubt that your judge is experiencing right now against your case. That's Aristotelian rhetoric. My opponent said this, and I think you're probably even thinking of these other historical examples where it seemed that way too. That can lead to tyranny. I've thought about that though. So now we're acknowledging to the judge that we understand the viewpoint, and it is a good viewpoint. Our opponents aren't anathema. But I have two responses because I've come to a different conclusion. That's how we build our credibility. We build our credibility by showing the virtue of intellectual honesty. Then we have our claims and our proof. These can wash, rinse, repeat a few times because you want to say, my opponent said this, and I have however many responses you have. I have just one response. Then you're going to go claim, proof, impact. I have two responses. Claim, proof, impact. I have three responses. Claim, proof, impact. And Making sense? The proof warrants the claim, simple bumper sticker. Key point. You sometimes call this a tag, but I dislike that word because there are two meanings of the word tag in debate. And one is appropriate here and one is not. What are the two meanings of tag?
Well, one is response.
One is the response, the claim. Good. And what's the other?
It's like an abbreviation of what you're going to say.
I would still say that that's the response. The abbreviated form is the tag. It's a label. Do you guys ever make briefs? What if all of your briefs said Russia is bad, 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 for 5 different pieces of evidence? The length, good, appropriate for a claim tag, but it's not going to help you find, well, this one actually points to this historical example, and that one points to this statistic, and this one points to this person's opinion. And so you're going to have to sit at the table, thumbing through pages and pages of paper, and reading, trying to figure out why is Russia bad in this quote versus that quote. So we want our evidence tags to include the warrants. They should be a line or two long, so that we know with confidence, if I read this quotation, I already know Russia is bad because whatever warrants are going to be contained within that example. I should never read that to the judge though, right? Right. Because we think in debate rounds. And instead of reading scripts, like our NCs, we listen and then we customize our claims every round, all the time, to the arguments that we have at hand. So there are two kinds of tags. The ones in your evidence include warrants, the ones in your speech do not, because you're going to say these warrants prove the claim. Any questions about that? I see some confused faces. Yeah.
I'm confused, but I don't know what question to ask to clarify.
What's most confusing?
The part about tags, you said there's tags in evidence and tags in your
In your speech. Yeah, so here, let me give you an example. So my opponent has just said that, do you have a case?
Sort of, no.
Do you have a case?
I'm not an
Do you have a case? What's your case?
Affirmative values or social sustainability.
Social sustainability. Okay, so my opponent valued social sustainability. The claim tags are my responses. 1, utilitarian. 2, unlimited. You guys don't know what I mean by that. I know what I mean by that. And when I speak from an outline, right? Because we're good speakers. We don't speak from scripts, we speak from outlines, also known as our flow. This is my flow. So when I respond, I come up and I say, my opponent said that social sustainability ought to be the value you use to sort out needs of the public and private property rights, the resolution I've just identified. I thought about that, but I've come to a place where I don't think social sustainability is the right way to look at it. And I have 2 responses as to why. The first is utilitarian. When you take a look at social sustainability, it's purely a model of pros and cons, benefits and costs. Unfortunately, it leaves whoever is in charge of that model to determine what is beneficial or not. A principled approach is much better, and social sustainability lacks principles. Second response, it's unlimited. To what extent can a society be sustained? Well, some would think that it would mean we take all of our private property and resort and reshuffle it around because of global warming and the impending doom of global warming. Some would think, and we can go down the laundry list of historical thoughts about just the environment alone, not to mention other races, other nationalities, national security threats, and so on, that people are really up in arms about being sustainability issues of our society. Our society is constantly at risk, according to most people. Well, one of those people is going to be in charge. And that's why my opponent's viewpoint, while it sounds good to each of us, if each of us were in government, it probably would be. But it has to be rejected because it's so unlimited in scope. And government is miraculous. So you shouldn't use my opponent's value of social sustainability. Instead, let's look at an alternative counter-value, individual rights. Now I've concluded my own act. So that's the full thing. So what I'm saying is, claim tag is this. It's almost arbitrary. It doesn't have to sound great. It's like a nice little label. It goes on your flow, it goes on the judge's flow. All of us write the same thing. Evidence tag would be if I actually had the global warming quotation, which I do in my neg, if I had that in my brief, that global warming is a issue of social sustainability that many people have wanted to take a lot of property for. That's a nice long tag. That would be what's on my brief on printed paper. To help me find the quotation I will use to support that small claim tag. Was that clearer?
I got lost on the evidence category.
Okay.
But
Are you an LD?
first part-
Are you an LD?
Yeah.
Do you have briefs?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so and that may be where the issue is. So when I think a value demand should have 120 pages on each side, probably of their own briefs, quotations with a tag, a citation, and a quote. Tag, citation, quote. Does someone have an example brief here? You can sort that out later. Okay, so when you look at it on paper, it'll make a lot more sense, I promise. Any other questions about this? I'm ready to do impacting. I'm not ready to do impacting yet. Let me tell you about warrants as long as we're going through this. This applies to Parley, big time. This is why I love diving into classical rhetoric and how it has to offer us, instead of stopping our exploration of debate at the year 1980, which is when Austin J. Freely's argumentation and debate book, which is kind of the foundation of most collegiate and high school debating, was written. Because historically, rhetoric is more of a science, think biology, than an art, think I just make up and do stuff. Rhetoric has 5 main divisions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inside of each of these are subdivisions. Inside of each of these are subdivisions. Inside of each of these are subdivisions. And all of this is freely available to you on the internet because Quintilian, Cicero, Aristotle wrote about it. Aristotle believes there are 3 stock issues in deliberative oratory, which is another way of saying there are 3 stock issues in policy debate. Do you think any of them are named inherency? What is noble? What is just? What is expedient? Aristotle has 3 stock issues. Quintilian has 4. Cicero has 5. And you all learned in the 1980s debate thinker Austin J. Freely says are the 4 stock issues of deliberative oratory. But our traditions and information is actually much richer and deeper than that. There's a really awesome article out there that compares 15 different rhetorical philosophers and what they think the stock issues of policy debate are. Discovery or invention is the first canon of rhetoric. And then you have arrangement, which is organization, style, delivery, which everybody thinks is what rhetoric is, and the lost canon called memorization. It's called the lost canon because you don't typically go to a 2-hour oratory where Cicero has to hold the attention of people for 2 hours, and it's 2,000 of them, and he's come the day before, and he has a specific pacing regimen. He's constructed mental palace. He's put on that light fixture, this one concept, on that one another. Memorization, not like you do it in your speech competitions where you memorize word for word, like you do it conceptually, because you always have to be adapting to an audience, but you have to memorize. That's the lost canon rhetoric. And there's all these really cool pictures of, through the Middle Ages, they practiced this art, different ways to pace a room and arrange a room based on the memorization of your speech, and they're like cool little cloth tablets with where you walk and stuff. It's really interesting. But yeah, so it's called the Lost Canon. Delivery is what you think it is. Style, we'll dive into tomorrow when we do phrasing. We'll look at some tropes and some schemes like antimetaboly and anaphora, things you should know, but you don't. And then discover. This is where all ideas come from. In rhetoric, there are 5 common topics. So the first next level down of discovery are the topics that are common to every discourse. Definition, circumstance, relationship, opposites, and evidence, testimony, or proof. They don't write in English, so unfortunately sometimes words I may say is not exactly the word that you would find if you went to rhetoric green as opposed to rhetoric forest as opposed to Corbett on rhetoric. So that's why I'm saying all these or. There are 5 major topics. And inside of one of those is testimony, proof, evidence. There are 7 types of evidence. Let's learn. Historical example, personal example. By the way, LDers tend to be really good at the historical example, and policy debaters tend to be weak there. Expert testimony / quotation. Policy debaters tend to only do that instead of thinking. Statistics. Law, or you can say precedent is a better word. So when you quote from the Declaration of Independence as the reason that your value is the value, or you quote from the preamble to the Constitution and say that's why national security is one of the 3 prongs of government, that's a reference to precedent, legal precedent. You could also quote from a Supreme Court opinion or case or something like that. That would all be under law and precedent. Then you have maxims and rumors. Some authors group these, some don't. And finally, you have logic. So back to a different way of thinking about debate. So when my brother won nationals, TP in 2010, and then Parley, he won the first Parley nationals in 2011. And in TP, so he was good at both. In TP, I remember this one out round, it was like octafinals, and he had been using some historical examples and logic. And a person came up here in typical sophomore debate fashion. You said this point. Did you have any evidence to support it? Yes. What quote did you use? I didn't use one. How is that evidence? Because Aristotle says there are 7 types of evidence: historical examples, personal examples, statistics, laws, rumors, maxims, and logic. I had so many debaters use that exact quote in out rounds at nationals. It's a good list to memorize. It's also because it's where ideas come from. When I am prepping Parley, I am running through this list all the time in my head. It's the reason that you learn structures. It's the reason that you learn that a disadvantage maybe should have causes, sub-causes, and drivers and impacts, or you might know them as internal link breaks and impacts. You learn these things so that your mind can rapidly discover available proof to you. This list is the available proof that rhetoric has seen over the ages for you to use as warrants. I recommend mixing and matching. You probably want to have 2 or 3 responses of different types, because that speaks to different judges and audiences differently. So when I'm debating, I want to throw out a statistic, a historical example, and a piece of logic. Where's your logic come from? Debate theory. So I like to say things like, first, no link. My opponent's value doesn't actually directly link to the resolution, even though it's a good value. Second, historically rejected. Let me tell you about this situation. Third, experts disagree. And you quote. So you have a mix and match of different types of responses, and that really strengthens your argument pretty dramatically. So those are your available types of warrants that prove your claims. Now let's sit on logic before we move back out of it. Because some people say, well, logic's not evidence. I think that's literally insane. I mean literally. Because what is logic?
It's a form of proof.
Much more.
Isn't that how you interpret the evidence and then how you look back and how you think?
Right, so you can't even, your evidence doesn't do anything, your quotation doesn't do anything unless you analyze that that proof in fact supports your claim and that that claim is actually relevant. But that's not why it's insane. That is very nice analysis. You can't not use logic. Logic is rationality. Logic is based on the presupposition of the law of non-contradiction. A cannot be both B and not B at the same time. If you're using logic, you're using rationality. So to say that logic is an acceptable form of proof, to me, is another way of saying, I don't want to be rational. So you can logically pick apart a PhD all day, and great debaters do it. Do you know how great debaters do it? They look at the warrants that the PhD provided for the claim that the PhD is making, and they say, that's bogus. And if they can explain that to an audience, they can succeed in taking down the PhD. Yes?
So you were also talking earlier about how important it is to be clear, because obviously for the judges it doesn't matter to list all these fancy types of logic if they don't understand it.
Yes.
Even if your opponent did.
Yes.
So wouldn't it also be important that even if you're doing all these, to make sure that you are very clear?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Clarity, it can't be underestimated. Because here's how a judge works. Round 5 of the judge's day, they're done, they take their flow, they go over there, they pour themselves a cup of coffee. They see Mike. Hi Mike, how was your round?
It's interesting.
Yeah. Mine too, it was kind of like that. What have you been up to lately? I haven't seen you in a while.
Just working away, and things are good, family's good.
And we do that for 10 minutes. Now, I'm going to go write this ballot down before the next round. And I go and I sit at a table much like this, while sipping my coffee, with other people around me that I talk to, sometimes. And I have to stare at the words on this. And the words have to re-persuade me. Because I forgot what happened. I'm not kidding. It's sad. But that's because we pack rounds in like meat factories and make sure that you have 6 rounds. And so the importance of each successive one goes down. So you got to understand that that's where the judge is. So clarity cannot be underestimated. If a judge is saying anything, you think, I thought they had a good example there. But if they can't articulate it, because here's another thing about judges, they're nervous. I learned this the first time I interviewed someone for a job. If you're going to interview someone for a job and your colleague is there with you, you're more concerned about what your colleague thinks of your questions than the person answering. It's absolute truth. Your judges see you again. Your judges, most of them, weren't homeschooled. They feel that you're smarter than them. They really do. They shouldn't. They make 1,000 billion decisions all the time, but they don't use magical words like inherency and parametrics and condo picks to do it. But they make the same decisions that are. So they kind of put you on this pedestal a little bit, and it's intimidating to them. And they want to write something that doesn't make you, when you get it, and they've seen it happen because they go to all your ballot parties, go, stupid, we're a waste of time. This is the pressure on a judge as they're sitting there. And so they're latching on to whatever's the clearest thing, trying to make a clear decision, which is why they sometimes write less than you would like. It's because those are the thoughts going on in their head. Yeah, clarity. Impacts. What we were talking about. There are 3 levels of impacting. And the hardest part about all this is that this is never on your flow. This is usually not on your flow when you're the speaker, and this is not on your flow. Usually just the claim is what you write down and speak from, So the rest of 4-point refutation is habitual. So that I have to add 3 things here makes that habit exceedingly difficult. You have to impact to the argument, which most people do, to the function. What kind of argument is this? Why is this argument here? Most debaters don't do that. To the round. As a result of whatever I have proven doing to all of the arguments in the round, this is the new result of the round. You write your judges' ballots for them. It's subtle language, though. This whole thing can be one sentence. If you agree with me that my opponent's value of social sustainability is too utilitarian and unlimited to use as a test of the resolution, unfortunately my opponent's entire case, all contentions, rested on impacting to social sustainability. Until my opponent reestablishes social sustainability, there is not one thing going for the needs of the public side of the resolution. I think you should vote right here, right now. But I'm going to also present a case going the other direction on private property. Did you see how that's a kill shot? That's what I like to do. Push really hard on the other side. If I've made a point, but I have to understand the function of my point. So I just was able to impact all the way to the round because I understand the function of a value. And even though the judge doesn't necessarily understand the function of a value, they understood it that time at that moment because I explained it to them. Theory flows from the round. That's what functions of arguments come from. So let's go and say that I'm erasing all this. I'll keep going. My opponent has talked about Hitler because it's LD, and that's what they always do.
Or communism.
And communism, thank you. Communism and socialism are the same thing to most debaters. It's true. Sorry. My opponent used the historical examples of Hitler in communist and socialist countries as examples to support my opponent's side of the resolution. But here's the thing. There are actually 180 some odd countries, I think. Maybe it's 112, I forget. Those examples are just too extreme. Don't make your decision on needs of the public and private property based on what the most extreme dictators have done in the entire history of the world. Instead, let's look at the common examples, the everyday trade-offs. Do we make a highway here or not? Do we allow Walmart to build here or not? Do we build a military base here or not? Can we tax or not? How do taxes? Let's look at the real issues that are commonplace to the resolution. So now I have to figure out what to do. And it's not staring at me in the face. So where do you get the function from? You get the function by reverse engineering the flow and saying, oh, this was supportive of contention 1, whatever the claim was. So then I say, function-wise, there being no other support for contention 1, this claim falls. But we still need to go look at contentions 2 and 3, which is where I'll go next. So when we can't win the round, we explain that the impact of the function of making the argument against claim 1 is that now there are only 2 remaining claims to address. Once we have addressed all their claims, then we can impact to the totality of the round. Am I making sense? So it depends on what we're refuting, what the function is. In policy, if we're turning a link, that function is different than saying there is no link, which is different than saying we are mitigating the link. All 3 attack a link or a cause, but they have 3 different expressions of it, and each one has a different function. If we turn the link, what's the impact?
They're completely useless.
More. We have run an affirmative case. Our opponents have run a disadvantage on us. We have turned the link and said the opposite cause happens. And I know, don't worry if you're lost, parent judges, because this is more of a test of debate theory, which is the point.
If we turn their disadvantage, then we show that if we don't pass our case, then the disadvantage is going to happen.
Good. So we say, my opponent's disadvantage is therefore turned, which means it's now an advantage for my case. My opponent's own viewpoint actually is supportive of my case, not against it, and my opponent's own side has the very disadvantage they presented. And since they already said that that's important by running the disadvantage, I think you should vote on this right here, right now. That's impacting all the way to there. But we can only do that because we understand the function of turning a link, which you understood. Very nice. That it flips a disadvantage. But if we just mitigated the link, then this disadvantage no longer serves as a reason to vote against my case. Let's go look at something else. If we outweigh the disadvantage, this disadvantage is true and it happens, but we have a better advantage that's more important. So you should still vote affirmative. Yeah.
Can you give an example of how LV debaters can turn links? Can you just give an example without using all that?
Yeah. So let's just say, okay, I don't think Hitler and communism are probably going to end up on the things of the public side, but in a glory day that happened to us. The link is that needs of the public caused whatever their claim was. I don't know what it was. But what we're going to say over here, we're going to turn it. Turn. Actually, the reason that Hitler, communist, and socialist regimes work is because they collectively put property all together and they take away property rights. So if you want to avoid the kinds of historical examples they've laid out, you need to vote negative, because negative side avoids that. That's all that it is. Yep. Good question. All right, let's try it. So I am going to make a garbage case really quick for something, and you are going to come up with a few responses. You're going to present them, and I guess now we're focusing on all of 4-point refutation, but especially the expression of impact. And I think where it's going to stretch you the most is right here. Because if you can't explain to an audience why the point you just made leads to voting on your side, how are they going to do it? You're going to get a random ballot. Another way of saying this, though, that I find interesting, so I had this advanced debater, Drew Chambers, who, when we were having this discussion, I was just upset at him because I was like, well, the reason you're not getting anywhere with your arguments is because they're weak. You're just challenging every statistic and every flaw and every fallacy you see. But what's the function of challenging a fallacy inside? Unless you can relate it to winning the round, it doesn't matter. And he's like, what? You're saying only spend my time making winning arguments? And then he hurt himself. He's like, oh. Yeah, that makes sense. If you don't know why your argument helps you, you shouldn't make it in the first place. But that requires understanding the debate theory, which is hard. So you're not always going to be there. And that's why I think that this still doesn't have to be planned. It does. It is a mental habit. Is because if you know why you're making the argument, then you just explain why you made the argument. That's all that it really is. Why did I make this argument? Well, let me think about that. I guess it's because they started with this argument, and then we said that, and then they said this, and then we said this, and as long as we undo this all the way back to the beginning of the case, gone. We win. But we have to be able to articulate that to our audiences. That's a challenge. All right, here comes the garbage case.